It was my 67th birthday when my son threw me out of the house. Rain was coming down in long, sharp lines, the kind that soaks through your coat before you even find your breath. I stood on the sidewalk, clutching a single suitcase and a rusted key in my hand. The only thing I owned after 38 years of marriage. A key to a garage I had never seen. My name is Helena Maris. For 40 years, I was a wife. For 38, a mother. I thought that meant I had a home. I thought that meant something permanent. But when Nathaniel, my husband, passed away 3 weeks ago, permanence disappeared with him. That morning, I had dressed in black, not for mourning, but out of habit. The penthouse, my husband's pride, our life's work, smelled of fresh paint and new furniture. Everything about it felt like it was preparing for someone else. I was right. The lawyer, Miranda Sloan, arrived with a thin folder. My son, Colby Maris, was already there. My only child standing beside his wife, arms crossed like a man who had already won. "Shall we begin?" Miranda asked. Her voice was professional, distant, the kind of tone you use when you don't want to feel what you're about to say. The will was simple. To Colby, the penthouse property and all associated holdings, valued at $9 million. To Helena, a garage located on Old Haven Road, including all contents therein. That was it. A garage, not a home, not a share of the company Nathaniel built. A garage. Colby smirked, the kind of smirk that tightens your heart. "Dad wanted things fair, Mom," he said, sliding the papers across the table. "You've got something. Be grateful." I blinked. A garage? What would I even do with it? He leaned forward, fingers tapping the polished table. He made his choice. Maybe he thought you'd want somewhere quiet. "Quiet?" I whispered. "You're giving me a place to be quiet?" Colby straightened his tie. "It's better than nothing. You should be happy you still have somewhere to go." That was the first time I noticed it. The absence of warmth in his voice. The same voice that used to call me Mom like it meant something. Miranda tried to soften the moment. "Mrs. Maris, the documents are clear. The transfer has been finalized. You'll find the key inside this envelope." Colby was already scrolling on his phone, bored, impatient. "So we're done here?" I wanted to scream, to ask him what went wrong, to ask how he could look at me, the woman who raised him, who sewed his prom suit when we couldn't afford tailoring, who hid her own hunger so he could have enough, and see nothing. But I didn't. Because Nathaniel had raised him too, and maybe the silence was something my husband taught us both. I folded the document, slipped the rusted key into my palm, and stood. My legs were shaking, but I didn't let him see. "Mom," Colby said as I reached for the door, "don't take it personally. Dad trusted me to handle things. You'll be fine." I turned back. He looked so much like his father, the same jawline, the same sharpness in his eyes. But there was something colder now, something that didn't belong to either of us. "Take care of yourself," I said quietly. He shrugged. "I already do." And that was it. That was the last conversation I had with my son under the same roof. By afternoon, my things were stacked in cardboard boxes beside the elevator. The concierge looked away. Even the doorman, who had greeted me every morning for 20 years, didn't meet my eyes. It was still raining when I stepped outside. The city lights blurred into streaks. I tried to remember the last time Colby hugged me. I couldn't. I pulled my coat tighter and looked at the key. Its teeth were rusted, its handle worn smooth. A key that belonged to another lifetime. I whispered to myself, "Happy birthday, Helena." No one answered. A gust of wind pushed against me, and for the first time I realized how heavy silence could be. I thought losing Nathaniel would be the end of my world, but grief has a cruel way of showing you there's still lower ground to fall. When a husband dies, you lose half your heart. When your son turns you away, you lose the rest. I hailed a cab with shaking fingers. The driver asked for an address. I gave him one I'd never spoken before. "Old Haven Road," I said. "The garage." He nodded and the car pulled into traffic. I watched the city fade behind the raindrops, the skyline warping into something distant, unreachable. My voice trembled as I spoke, not to him, but to the memory of the man who left me this strange inheritance. "I thought you'd leave me love, Nathaniel, but you left me a key." As the headlights sliced through the rain, something inside me cracked. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet break. Voiceover. "I thought I'd be mourned. I thought I'd be remembered. But I was wrong. I wasn't a widow. I was an afterthought." And so, on the day I was born, I started over, with nothing but a rusted key and a silence that felt heavier than the rain. The cab ride was quiet. The driver didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer answers. We passed neighborhoods I didn't recognize, each one older and sleepier than the last. The city slowly gave way to fog-wrapped streets and crooked signs until finally the cab slowed down beside a cracked sidewalk and pointed at an alley I would have missed if I blinked. "That's Old Haven Road," he said. I paid him in cash, stepped out with my suitcase, and the car disappeared into the mist like a memory. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the gate ahead. There was no nameplate, no number. Just an old wooden fence and a row of bent mailboxes rusting into the ground. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still bruised. I walked to the end of the alley and found it. A faded, green structure with ivy crawling up the side like time itself was trying to swallow it whole. The garage. Its walls leaned slightly, and one of the windows was boarded up. The lock was so rusted I wasn't sure the key would fit. But when I slid the key in, it turned with a heavy, reluctant click, like a door that hadn't been opened in years, suddenly waking up. I took a breath and pushed. The door creaked open with a groan that echoed down the empty street. It was dark inside, and for a second I wondered if this was a mistake. Then, as I stepped across the threshold, a motion sensor flickered to life overhead. One by one, soft yellow lights blinked on, and everything changed. The dust in the air swirled like memory. The floor wasn't concrete, but polished cement, clean, swept, still gleaming beneath a fine layer of age. Against the far wall, large shapes rested under canvas tarps. I stepped closer, heart thudding. The room smelled of motor oil and cedar, not decay, preservation. I reached for the first tarp and pulled it back. Underneath sat a Jaguar E-Type, deep navy blue, chrome trim still gleaming. My breath caught in my throat. Beside it, another shape waited. I uncovered it. A silver Porsche 356 Speedster, flawless curves, leather seats still intact. I blinked hard, stepping back. My knees nearly gave. These weren't just cars. They were relics, restored, cared for, hidden. I turned slowly in the space, then saw the far wall, lined with tools, equipment, and a small wooden desk with old notebooks stacked neatly beside a vintage banker's lamp. Above the desk, there was a single framed photo of Nathaniel, younger, his hands covered in grease, standing beside the Jaguar. He had been here. This had been his. There was no dust on the chair, no spider webs on the handles. Someone had been maintaining this. Maybe not recently, but until not long ago. And then I saw it. A steel cabinet tucked behind the Porsche, the door slightly ajar. Inside was a safe. On top of the safe lay a sealed envelope. It was cream-colored, thick and smooth, with my name handwritten on the front in ink that had begun to fade. Below it, in smaller writing, "If you find this before Colby, you were meant to." My fingers trembled as I picked it up. The envelope was heavy, not just in weight, in silence, in meaning. I didn't open it yet. I wasn't ready. I turned my gaze back toward the room. There were more cars, more tarps. One in the far corner was larger than the others, longer, wider. I walked over slowly, as if any sudden movement would break the air. The tarp slid off like silk, a Duesenberg SSJ. I gasped. Only two had ever been made. I remembered Nathaniel talking about them once, saying they were the crown jewels of American auto history. I hadn't known he'd found one. I hadn't known he'd kept it. There were no birthday cards this year, no candles, no calls. But here, in the quiet hum of the garage lights, I realized I had been left something far more deliberate than a party. This wasn't neglect, it was protection. He hadn't given me a place to disappear. He'd given me a fortress. The rain had returned, tapping softly against the tin roof as if asking permission to come in. I set my suitcase down by the desk and sat for a moment, letting the silence settle. There was something sacred about the space. It didn't feel like a garage. It felt like a museum, like a memory he had built and preserved, just for me. The envelope still sat in my lap, waiting. I ran my fingers along its edge and whispered, "You always were better with actions than words." I could still hear Nathaniel's voice in the back of my mind, calm, firm, always 5 steps ahead. I rose slowly and walked to the safe. It had no digital lock, just an old-fashioned rotary dial. On the side, a post-it note, faded but legible. Birth year twice. I turned the dial. 1956, 1956. The safe clicked open. Inside were files, ledgers, titles, certificates, and another envelope. This one wasn't sealed. It held a folded document, a declaration of trust, signed and notarized, with my name listed as sole beneficiary. There was a schedule of assets. The cars were only part of it. There were bonds, property deeds, stocks, all hidden, all protected, all mine. Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. He hadn't abandoned me. He'd built a fortress while I wasn't looking, and he'd left me the key. I sat with the sealed envelope for a long time, my hands curled around its weight like it might vanish if I let go. The hum of the overhead lights cast a gentle glow across the garage, flickering slightly with the pull of the old wiring. Outside, the rain softened to a whisper. I knew his handwriting before I even opened it. Slanted, steady, the kind of penmanship that came from years of engineering blueprints and hand-signed contracts. I ran my thumb along the flap, then broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of thick ivory paper. No greeting, no date. Just his voice, as if he were sitting across from me, speaking into the silence he'd left behind. "Helena, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it in time to explain things the way I wanted. I'm sorry for that. I never believed I'd leave before I had the chance to make everything right with you. So I'm writing this now while I still can. You deserve to know the truth." I read it slowly, each word heavier than the last. His voice in my head was clear, calmer than I remembered. He wasn't poetic. He was precise. I started noticing things with Colby a few years ago. The late-night wire transfers, the disappearing accounts, the attempt to modify our estate plan without talking to you. He brought in someone. A financial advisor, said it was about streamlining. But I knew what it was. He was trying to move everything under his control. He almost succeeded. I paused. My chest felt tight. I never told you about the hospital scare 2 summers ago. It wasn't just my heart. They found something else. It wasn't serious yet, but it made me realize how fragile time is. That was when I started making changes. Not out of fear, but clarity. That was when I created the trust, quietly, legally, protected. I assigned Miranda Sloan because she has no ties to either of you and because she doesn't scare easily. The garage, this place, is more than a shelter. It's a vault, a bridge, a test. I leaned back in the chair, the edge of the letter trembling in my grip. Everything we built, the company, the investments, even the cars, it's all in the trust, all under your name. Not because I didn't love our son, but because I saw what ambition was doing to him, and I saw what silence had done to you. This garage was always meant for you. I started working on it the year Colby moved out. I told myself I was just fixing up the old place, but that was a lie. I was building something that wouldn't crumble the way we did. I wanted to give you a place that couldn't be taken away. I didn't know if you'd ever open that envelope, but if you did, it means you're stronger than I feared, and exactly who I remember." Tears blurred my eyes, but I didn't wipe them away. In the bottom drawer of the desk, there's a small lockbox. Inside it is the original trust agreement and a copy of Colby's attempt to change the POA. I kept them both. I hoped we'd never need them, but you're going to be smarter than me, stronger, and you'll know when to use them. I stared at the letter until the words began to blur. My fingers shook, not from fear, but something else. A rising clarity, like something long buried was starting to wake up. I walked to the desk and opened the bottom drawer. There it was, a black metal box with a narrow latch. I found the key taped underneath the drawer where his fingers must have placed it months ago. Inside were 2 documents. One bore my name in bold. Beneath the header, Revocable Living Trust, Helena Maris. The other was a printed email thread, an attached scanned document, and a signature that mimicked mine. But it wasn't. Colby had tried to forge a power of attorney. I sat down slowly, the truth heavier than grief. My son had tried to take everything, and my husband had stopped him, silently, carefully, by giving it all to me. I looked up at the Jaguar, its chrome edges catching the light. He didn't leave me behind. He left me a map, a path out of the silence, a set of tools, a chance to rebuild. I folded the letter, not with anger, but with reverence. Then I placed it back in the envelope and tucked it into the lockbox, alongside the trust and the forgery. They didn't belong in a courtroom, not yet, but they were real, and they were mine. Outside, a bird called out from a distant tree. The rain had stopped. The sky was still gray, but the air felt different now, less like an ending, more like a threshold. I whispered to the stillness, "You were always 5 steps ahead." Then I stood, steadier than I had all week. I didn't know exactly where this road would lead, but for the first time since the funeral, I wasn't walking blind. The morning after I read Nathaniel's letter, I woke up on the small cot tucked behind the garage's desk. My back ached. My knees popped when I stood. But there was something in my chest that hadn't been there the night before. Resolve, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that settles into your bones. I made tea on a rusted electric kettle I found behind the tool bench. The water tasted faintly of metal, but it was hot, and it reminded me I was still here. Afterward, I opened the desk drawers one by one, careful not to rush. I found a small photo album wrapped in cloth, filled with snapshots of our early days. A younger me holding Colby at the hospital, Nathaniel standing by his first prototype, a dog I barely remembered but must have loved once. Beneath that, tucked between 2 old ledgers, was a folder marked simply, Mendocino. I opened it slowly. Inside were printed property documents, title transfers, utility records, all in my name. At the bottom, a worn key ring with a small brass tag, Seabird Cottage. There was also a map, hand-drawn, with notes in Nathaniel's writing, circling the edges of a quiet coastal town I hadn't visited in 20 years, Mendocino, a name I hadn't said out loud in decades. The last time I was there, Colby had been a teenager. Nathaniel had taken me away for my birthday, just the 2 of us. He'd bought a paperweight shaped like a seashell from a local artisan and told me, "One day, we'll live somewhere the waves come to visit." Now it seemed he'd kept that promise. As I sat in the garage, the landline rang, an old corded phone mounted to the wall. The sound startled me. I hadn't heard a real ring in years. I picked up. "Mrs. Maris?" A woman's voice, calm and clipped. "This is Miranda Sloan." I didn't say anything at first. "I'm calling to confirm receipt of the trust notice," she continued. "According to the stipulations your husband left, the property in Mendocino must be physically confirmed by you within 14 days, or it will be held in temporary conservatorship." "I'll go." I said quietly. Today. There was a pause. That's wise. I've arranged for the documents to be delivered to the cottage. They'll be in a secure packet in the living room. I hung up and looked around the garage once more. I locked the safe, closed the drawer, folded the letter back into its envelope, and tucked it into my coat pocket. The Porsche wouldn't go unnoticed on the highway. I didn't need attention. So I called a car service, packed my small suitcase again, and slipped the Mendocino folder into the side pocket. 3 hours later, I was standing in front of a weathered gate, surrounded by cypress trees, the ocean air threading through my scarf. Seabird Cottage sat low against the hill, its shingles sun-bleached, its windows facing the cliffs like it had nothing left to prove. I stepped inside. It smelled like cedar, dried lavender, and something else. Something faintly like him. The lights were already on. The fireplace had kindling neatly stacked beside it. There was a folded quilt on the couch in a pattern I remembered from a catalog Nathaniel once circled in red. The bookshelves were lined with old hardcovers, and a wooden table in the corner held a ceramic bowl filled with keys. I spotted my name on an envelope beneath it. Inside, a single sheet of paper, Miranda's letterhead. A checklist of things to be reviewed and signed. At the bottom, a line in Nathaniel's handwriting. I chose everything with you in mind. I walked through the cottage like I was visiting a version of myself I'd forgotten. The bedroom had white curtains and soft gray linens. There was a small pottery wheel in the sunroom, dusty, unused, but ready. A teacup sat beside it, cracked slightly but clean. I opened the closet. Inside, neatly hung, were cardigans in my size, a sun hat I thought I'd lost years ago, and a shoebox tucked on the floor. I lifted it gently and opened the lid. Old photographs, a silver brooch, and a scanned image, grainy, black and white, of an ultrasound. I knew it before I turned it over. Colby's first picture. Nathaniel had kept it all. He had built this place for me, not as a consolation, but as a continuation, not to mourn what we lost, but to protect what remained. I stood at the window and looked out at the sea. The wind brushed the glass like fingers passing through memory. I whispered, "You didn't leave me a house. You left me a version of myself I thought was gone." I spent the rest of the day lighting the fireplace, unpacking the books, opening windows that hadn't been touched in months. When the breeze rolled in, it carried salt and eucalyptus, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but space. The call came just after 9. I was sitting at the kitchen table in Seabird Cottage, watching steam rise from a chipped mug and trying to remember how to start mornings alone. The sun had just begun to stretch across the tide, pale and reluctant when my cell phone buzzed. Colby. I stared at his name for a moment before answering. "Mom," he said. No greeting, no hesitation. Just pressure disguised as casual. "Yes?" "I've been thinking about the garage." I didn't say anything. "I might need to use it for collateral," he continued. "Short term, obviously, just until the deal closes." "What deal?" He hesitated. "A development pitch. Commercial residential hybrid. It's moving fast." "And the penthouse?" "Already leveraged." The words came quickly, clipped, like he was hoping I wouldn't catch them. "You mortgaged the penthouse?" "It's fine, I'm fine, but the garage, look, it's sitting there, doing nothing. It would help." I sipped my tea, letting the silence work in my favor. "I'm cleaning it," I said finally. "It's not ready." "You can't be serious." He laughed, but it didn't reach his voice. "It's a box of rust. You're not going to live in it." "I already have," I replied, and hung up before I could hear whatever came next. My fingers trembled, not with fear, but with clarity. The garage wasn't just a storage space. It was leverage, a truth he didn't know he'd already lost. The landline rang not long after. "Helena," came the voice, gravelly, familiar. "Ray? Thought I'd check in, just passed by the garage. Someone's been snooping." My grip tightened. "Describe them." "Black sedan, tinted windows. Driver didn't get out, but he circled twice. Didn't look like a neighbor. Colby? I said. Ray made a low sound. He always wanted shortcuts. Nathaniel told me once he'd bury himself in paper before he learned to build. I'm not giving him the garage. I didn't think you would. There was a pause. Ray, I said, would you be willing to sign a witness statement? About the cars, the maintenance, the value? I've got records, he said. Photos, too. Every oil change, every tire rotation. Nathaniel wanted it documented. Said if anyone ever came sniffing, the truth would already be written. I let out a slow breath. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You'll want to brace yourself. I heard Colby's pitch fell through. Investors pulled out. Because of him? Because of debt. Too much personal liability. He tried to use the penthouse as collateral, but the title's got restrictions. Smart man, your husband. I hung up the phone and stared at the sunlight shifting across the floorboards. Colby was spiraling, but instead of facing his fall, he was reaching for whatever he thought he still controlled. He didn't know the cars were appraised higher than his latest investment. He didn't know about the trust or the documents locked away. And most of all, he didn't know that the mother he pushed aside had stopped waiting to be invited back. That afternoon, I walked down to the post office in town and mailed Miranda a packet of papers. Inside, copies of the trust, the forged signature, and Ray's maintenance logs. I kept the originals in a new lockbox I'd placed inside the cottage closet. At sunset, I sat on the porch with a blanket across my lap, watching gulls wheel over the cliffs. I thought about the boy who used to run barefoot through our living room, arms outstretched like an airplane. I thought about the man who now saw property where he once saw home. Colby wasn't just failing. He was unraveling. And this time, I wasn't going to catch him. I spent the next few days moving slowly through the cottage, as if it might disappear if I moved too quickly. Each morning began with tea by the window and ended with salt in my hair from standing too long near the edge of the cliff. The wind here had a way of stripping you down to the truth. I hadn't spoken to Colby since the call about the garage. Part of me wanted to check on him. The other part knew that silence could speak louder than anything I had left to say. On the fourth morning, a knock came at the door. I opened it to find a woman with short gray curls, wind-chapped cheeks, and a basket in her arms. "Helena Maris," she said, smiling wide. "You haven't aged a minute." It took me a second to place her. Then it hit. "Lorraine Winters," I said, "from the bookstore, back in Santa Clara. I moved up here 10 years ago, got tired of pretending my son was going to stop asking for money." She stepped inside without waiting for permission, as if she belonged. "I saw your name on the property roll. Small towns keep good gossip." She handed me the basket. Inside were lemons, a jar of honey, and a still warm loaf of bread. "You're not the only one starting over," she said, pulling her coat off and hanging it on the back of the kitchen chair. "Let me guess. Yours involves a man, a trust, and a grown child with too many opinions?" I laughed. It felt foreign, like a song I hadn't heard in years. "Close enough," I said. We spent the morning talking. Lorraine had sold her house after her son tried to co-sign a loan in her name. She'd moved to Mendocino, started a garden, and never looked back. "You think you'll forgive him?" I asked. "I already have," she said, pouring tea into chipped mugs, "but that doesn't mean I let him back in." Her words settled in me like an anchor. That afternoon, while she tended to the overgrown rosemary bush outside, I opened a book Nathaniel had left on the living room shelf. Tucked inside the back cover was a folded sheet of paper. Another surprise. This one was a carbon copy of the original will Nathaniel had filed years ago. The one before Colby tried to alter it. It was signed, witnessed, and dated. A handwritten note beneath the final signature read, "Always keep the truth in more than one place." I slid the paper into a new folder I'd begun keeping in my room, a collection of documents, proof, stories, fragments of a life I was beginning to reclaim. Later that evening, Lorraine and I walked along the bluff, our scarves tangled in the wind. "What will you do with it all?" she asked. "The cars, the property." "I don't know yet," I said, "but I'm learning not everything has to be decided right away." She nodded. "That's what this place is for, space to hear your own voice again." That night, I left the windows open. The waves crashed in the distance like distant applause. I lit a fire and sat on the floor with my knees pulled to my chest. For the first time, since the funeral, I didn't feel like a woman in mourning. I felt like a woman preparing. I didn't plan on going back to the penthouse, but sometimes the only way forward is to walk through what hurt you. I arrived unannounced just before noon. The doorman was new. He didn't recognize me. He asked for my name like I was a stranger. I gave it. He buzzed Colby's unit, and after a long pause, the door clicked open. The elevator ride felt longer than it used to. The walls were the same, mirrored panels, polished brass, but the feeling was different, colder. Like time had drained the warmth from everything we built. When I stepped out, the hallway smelled like forgotten takeout and cologne. The door to the penthouse was open, but no one greeted me. "Colby?" I called. His voice came from inside, sharp and tired. "Back here." I stepped in. The living room looked nothing like it used to. The leather couch was gone, replaced by a second-hand sectional. Boxes lined the walls, some half open, filled with files, cords, unopened bills. The rug had been rolled up, and the floors were scratched like something heavy had been dragged. A single lamp lit the space. The curtains were still drawn. I found Colby in the dining area, hunched over a laptop, surrounded by empty coffee cups and paper stacks. He looked up, surprised. Not angry, not even curious. Just hollow. "Didn't expect you," he said. "I didn't expect this." He rubbed his temples. "It's temporary." I walked to the window and pulled back the curtains. The city spilled out beneath us, still beautiful, still indifferent. "Where's the painting?" I asked. "The one Nathaniel had picked out, the abstract skyline we used to sit under." "Sold it," he said flatly, "along with the wine fridge and the dining set." I turned back to him. He was thinner, his hair unkempt. The button-down he wore was wrinkled, his collar stained. A version of him I hadn't seen since his father's funeral, unmoored, restless. "Why are you here?" he asked, not hostile, just tired. "I wanted to see how you were." He laughed, bitter and small. "That's rich." I walked toward the bookshelf. What remained of it? A few of Nathaniel's biographies still sat there, spines cracked. One of them was open, papers tucked between the pages. I reached for them. "Don't," he said, suddenly sharp. But I had already pulled them out. There it was, a copy of the trust form. My name scratched out, a new version printed beneath it. My name forged in a signature that tried to mimic my hand, but didn't quite get it right. I turned slowly. "You kept this?" He didn't answer. "You tried to rewrite the truth." He stood now, pacing. I was under pressure. "The company—" "You're not the company," I said, voice steady. "You're my son." He stopped walking. His shoulders slumped. I thought I could handle everything. Dad made me feel like I had to. "No," I said. "You made yourself believe that." He sat back down, hard. "I didn't think you'd ever come back here." "I almost didn't," I admitted. But then I realized I needed to see it, the place where you stopped seeing me. He blinked at that. "I gave everything for this family," I said, "and you repaid me with silence, with signatures that weren't mine, with a goodbye disguised as practicality." Colby looked down at his hands. "I didn't know how to be a son after he died. I only knew how to survive." "Then it's time you learn the difference." I laid the papers on the table. "I have the originals, witnesses, documents. What you tried to do, it's done." He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He just nodded. When I turned to leave, he stood. "Do you hate me?" he asked. I stopped in the doorway. The walls around us felt closer than they used to. "I don't," I said, "but I don't trust you, not yet." I left him standing there in the middle of a room filled with what used to be everything. The elevator ride down was silent, the lobby empty. As I stepped out into the street, the air felt sharper, cleaner. I looked up at the building and wondered how many women like me had walked away from things they built, carrying nothing but their names. I didn't cry, not this time. I had cried enough over a boy who forgot I was human. 3 days passed before Colby reached out again. This time, it was a message, just 6 words. "Can we talk? I'll come up." I didn't answer right away. I stared at the screen, wondering what version of him would arrive. The boy who once made me tea when I had the flu, or the man who had tried to erase me with a forged signature. That afternoon, I set 2 mugs out on the kitchen table and lit the fire in the cottage hearth. The fog hung low over the cliffs, curling like smoke along the coastline. I didn't tidy the space. I didn't dress up. I just waited. He knocked once. I opened the door. Colby looked worn. He had shaved, but poorly. His eyes were red at the corners, and he was holding a manila folder under one arm like it might bite him. "Hi," he said. "Come in." He stepped inside and stood by the window as if asking the sea for courage. I handed him a cup of tea, and he took it without thanks. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about everything, about you." I didn't respond. The silence made him shift. I was wrong. About the will, about the garage. I let fear and pressure twist me. Still, I said nothing. He reached into his folder and pulled out a small stack of papers. "These are the records. Every transfer I made, every account I closed. I didn't know how deep I was until I saw it on paper." I scanned the pages. Overdrafts, business loans, partial repayments. His name, over and over, signing deals with no backing. "I need help," he said. "And I want to make it right." I looked at him, long and quiet. The boy I raised had gone somewhere I couldn't follow. The man in front of me wasn't whole, but he was cracking in the right direction. "You will not touch the trust," I said. "You will not go near the cars, the documents, or the garage. They are not yours." He nodded. "You will see a therapist once a week for 1 year. You will work doing something that isn't tied to power or profit. Something real, community service, a food bank. I don't care what, as long as it serves someone other than you." Colby's jaw tensed. "And if I don't, then you get nothing, not a cent, not a visit, not a word." He looked away, out toward the water. "And if I agree? Then we'll talk again in a year." I stood, walked to the desk, and pulled out a single-page agreement. Miranda had drawn it up. Not legally binding, but witnessed, notarized, and filed. "You'll sign this. Here, now." I handed him a pen. He hovered over the paper, reading the lines. Clauses that barred him from challenging the trust. Language that required transparency. A final paragraph that outlined the consequences of deceit. He signed. I countersigned. Then I walked to the front door and called out. Ray stepped in from his car. He wore a flannel coat, a serious expression, and carried a clipboard. "Just like we planned?" he asked. I nodded. Ray signed as witness. Then he handed me a second copy for Colby. Colby didn't look surprised, just tired. "I'm not your enemy," he said to Ray. Ray didn't answer. He just tipped his head and walked out the door. Colby folded the agreement and slid it into his folder. "Do I still call you Mom?" he asked. "That's your choice," I said, "but calling me doesn't mean I'll answer." He flinched at that, but didn't argue. As he turned to leave, I added one last condition. "You will not return to the penthouse. Sell it. Clear the debt. Find something small, humble." His shoulders dropped. "Fine." "And one more thing," I said. "You will not lie again. Not with words, not with silence." He looked back at me. For a moment, the storm in his face gave way to something almost familiar. "I won't," he said. After he left, I stood at the window, watching his car disappear down the winding road. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel sorry. I felt still. Later that night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat beside the fire, reading the agreement again. Not because I doubted it, but because I needed to see his name next to mine, in ink, on record, as witness to the line I had finally drawn. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was surviving someone else's choices. I felt like I was making my own. It was a Tuesday when Colby returned. No warning, no call, just a knock on the cottage door around 3 p.m. I was trimming the rosemary bush Lorraine had helped me plant, hands still damp with soil, when I heard it. I opened the door and found him standing there with no folder, no suit, no practice smile. Just Colby, in jeans and an old college sweatshirt, the sleeves pushed up to his elbows. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. I stepped aside without a word. He walked in like a guest, unsure if he was welcome. His eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on the fireplace, the books, the pottery wheel I still hadn't touched. I motioned to the table. "Sit." He did, slowly. We sat in silence for a moment. The clock ticked. Outside, a bird called from the trees and was answered by another. Then finally he spoke. "I found a letter." I looked up. Dad wrote it. Addressed to me. I didn't know it existed. It was in a folder tucked behind the fuse box in the penthouse closet. Probably slipped there when he cleared out the office. He pulled it from his coat pocket. Folded, worn, the creases soft with time. He didn't hand it to me. He just held it, like it grounded him. "Do you want to read it out loud?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, I already read it too many times." He paused. "It wasn't angry," he said. "Not like I expected. It wasn't cold either. It was honest." I said nothing. He said he saw what I was becoming. Not because I was bad, but because I was scared. That I thought controlling everything would keep things from breaking. That I made ambition my safety net. I folded my hands in my lap. He told me he loved me, that I didn't have to prove anything, that the real test wasn't what I built, it was who I became when things fell apart. Colby looked up at me, eyes red but dry. "I've been so angry," he said. "For so long. I thought he didn't trust me, thought you didn't either. But maybe it wasn't about trust. Maybe it was about protection." He opened the letter and slid it across the table. I didn't read it. I didn't need to. He rested his elbows on the table and stared at the grain of the wood. "I remember when I was 8, he said. "I broke my ankle falling off the jungle gym. You carried me across the field. You were shaking, but you didn't let me see it." I nodded slowly. "That's the last time I remember you being stronger than me," he said. "Until now." He looked up. "I'm sorry, Mom." The words were simple, but they landed like bricks. Not because I hadn't imagined them, but because I never thought I'd hear them from the son who once called me a fool. I didn't rush to respond. Instead, I stood and walked to the window. The waves below were restless, moving in long, steady breaths. "I spent years wondering what I did wrong," I said, "wondering how I failed you, how I raised a boy who could forget the woman who made him." I turned to face him. "But I didn't fail you, Colby. You chose. You chose shortcuts. You chose silence. You chose greed." He bowed his head. "And now," I continued, "you're choosing something else." He nodded. "It's not forgiveness yet," I said, "but it's a beginning." He stood slowly, walked over, reached into his pocket and placed something in my hand. The ultrasound. The same one Nathaniel had kept in the shoebox. The first picture of Colby. A blur of promise. "I thought it belonged to you," he said. I closed my fingers around it. "Thank you," I said. He turned toward the door but paused before leaving. "I'm still going to the meetings," he said. "Therapy. I'm volunteering at a shelter downtown. They assigned me to inventory. It's grounding." I smiled. Just barely. Good. He lingered 1 second longer, then left. When the door closed behind him, I sat with the ultrasound in my lap and let the silence settle like dust. Outside, the sun slipped lower, brushing the horizon with the faintest gold. I didn't cry, but something in me softened, like winter thawing one layer at a time. It was a Thursday morning when I drove into town with a folder under my arm and a purpose I no longer questioned. The fog hadn't lifted yet, and the street still smelled of salt and morning dew. I parked outside a small law office with a brass plaque that read, Sloan and Hartwell. Miranda was already waiting inside, sitting behind a desk stacked with manila envelopes, her glasses perched low on her nose. She looked up when I entered and gestured toward the chair across from her. "You ready?" she asked. "I've been ready for years," I said. We went over the trust first. She read aloud the key clauses while I followed along in silence. The cars, the cottage, the investments, all accounted for, all insulated. The paperwork Nathaniel left had been meticulous. He knew how to protect things without fanfare. "Here's where it gets interesting," Miranda said, sliding a new document toward me. "This is a revision to the current trust. It grants you enhanced control. You'll be the sole trustee with power to disperse funds on a conditional basis." "And Colby?" I asked. "He's not entitled to a cent unless you say so. And with this clause," she tapped the page, "even if he tries to contest it, he'll be blocked by the non-interference provision." I nodded. Good. Next came the affidavit. Ray had signed it the week before, detailing the maintenance records, the provenance of each car, and his first-hand knowledge of Colby's inquiries. It wasn't just helpful, it was airtight. "We'll also file a notice with the county registrar," Miranda said, "to secure the Mendocino property against unauthorized liens, and I recommend moving the lockbox documents into a safety deposit box. I've already arranged it under your name." I signed where she pointed. My name flowed across the paper with a steadiness I didn't expect. "And this?" I asked, reaching into my own folder. I handed her a copy of the forged power of attorney Colby had attempted. His signature faked, mine distorted. A ghost of a document that once had the power to undo everything. Miranda examined it carefully. "We'll keep this on file, not to prosecute, but to prevent." "Exactly." She leaned back. "Helena, you've done more in 3 weeks than some people manage in a decade." "I've had time to think," I said, "and a lot to protect." She smiled, then slid a final sheet across the table. "One last signature. This formalizes the conditional support agreement, the one you and Colby signed." I took the pen, hesitated only a second, and signed. The document locked into place. So did the choices. When we were done, she placed all the originals into a fireproof envelope and handed me a duplicate copy. "I'll courier these to the safety box this afternoon," she said. "No one but you will have access." Outside, the sky was still low and gray, but something in me had shifted. I stepped back into the car, rested the envelope on the seat beside me, and stared at the wheel for a long minute before turning the key. I wasn't running anymore. I was securing the ground beneath me. Back at the cottage, I found a letter in the mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single check. Not from Colby, but from the organization where he'd started volunteering. A donation made in my name. I didn't smile. Not yet. But I folded it carefully and placed it on the mantel. Later that evening, Ray stopped by. He brought a paper bag with bread and olives, and we sat on the porch as the wind began to quiet. "It's done," I said. "Everything's signed." He nodded slowly. "I never thought he'd push you that far." "I didn't either," I said. "But maybe he needed to see what the line looked like." Ray took a sip from his thermos. Nathaniel would have been proud. Quietly, of course. Always quietly. We sat there as the sky darkened, the sound of waves filling the silence. I thought of all the years I spent waiting for permission, to act, to speak, to matter. But no one hands you that kind of permission. You write it yourself. That night, I placed the documents in a lockbox hidden beneath the floorboards of the guest room. I slid a fresh page into my notebook and began to write. Not a letter, but a plan. Not for Colby, for me. I didn't hear from Colby for 2 weeks. Not a message, not a call, not even a receipt from the therapist he'd promised to see. I told myself I wouldn't check. That trust wasn't a leash, and forgiveness wasn't a deadline. But silence, even the kind you choose, has a way of pressing in. It was Lorraine who broke it. She showed up one afternoon with fresh tomatoes from her garden and a newspaper folded under her arm. "You seen this?" she asked, handing me the front page. There was a small photo in the lower corner, grainy black and white. Colby standing beside a metal table, sleeves rolled, clipboard in hand. The caption read, "New volunteer leads inventory overhaul at South Shore. Food pantry." My heart didn't leap, but it stirred. "Looks like he's doing the work," Lorraine said, not unkindly. "He's always been good at beginnings," I said. "It's the staying that worries me." Still, that night I looked up the food pantry. It was 20 miles from the penthouse, in a part of the city he used to avoid. I imagined him standing under the humming fluorescent lights, sorting dented cans and expired cereal boxes. It was a start. 2 days later, a text came. Just finished my 4th shift. Didn't think I'd sweat this much doing something unpaid. I didn't reply. A week after that, another message. Group therapy is strange. But I've listened more than I've spoken. That's new for me. Still, I said nothing. The 3rd message came late on a Friday night. Sold the penthouse. Paid off 2 debts. Moved into a rental. Quiet, cold floors. Good reminder. This time, I replied. Noted. A few days later, he asked if he could visit. Not to talk about the trust. Not to make a request. Just to bring lunch. I told him he could come at noon. He arrived early, no car this time. He came by rideshare, holding 2 paper bags and a small bouquet of supermarket flowers. "I didn't know what you liked," he said, handing them over. "They're fine," I said. We sat outside under the cypress tree where the breeze smelled like ocean and pine. He unpacked the food, sandwiches, fruit, sparkling water, and set it out like a picnic. "I've been keeping notes," he said after a while, "from therapy, about patterns, habits, the ways I use power to feel safe." I didn't interrupt. "I think I wanted you to be proud of me, but only on my terms," he continued. "And when you weren't, I made you the enemy, even when you were right." I took a bite of my sandwich. "I used to think Dad loved you because you were quiet," he said. "But now I think he loved you because you didn't need to be loud." I looked at him. Really looked. He was tired but not broken. He was learning to sit inside his discomfort without lashing out. "I kept the ring," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "The one from the safe, sapphire. I didn't pawn it. I couldn't. I just held it once and knew I wasn't ready to carry that kind of meaning." "Good," I said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "My current schedule. Volunteer hours, therapy appointments, job applications, all of it." I didn't reach for it. "I'm not asking for a reward," he said quickly. "I just want you to see I'm showing up." I let the silence settle before answering. "This isn't a test you pass, Colby. It's a life you build." He nodded. Lorraine came by as he was leaving. She gave him a nod and a lemon from her basket. After he left, she looked at me. "Well?" "He's learning," I said. She smiled. "Aren't we all?" That evening, I walked down to the beach with the flowers he brought and let the wind carry the petals into the waves, not as a gesture of closure, but as a reminder that not everything has to be held tightly to be real. It was a quiet morning, the kind that moved slowly, like the tide pulling back just a little further than usual. I had just finished sweeping the front porch when I saw him, Colby. He was walking up the path, not hurried, not hesitant, just present. He held nothing in his hands, no files, no flowers, only a small wooden box tucked beneath one arm. "Do you have a moment?" he asked when he reached the steps. I nodded and stepped aside. He walked into the cottage like it was his first time, even though he'd been here before. He noticed the new curtains, the ceramic bowl I'd made last week, the quilt Lorraine had gifted me. He didn't comment, just took it all in. "I found something," he said, setting the box on the table. He opened it carefully like something fragile might slip out. Inside, resting on a piece of folded cloth, was Nathaniel's wedding band and a letter with my name on it. The handwriting was unmistakable. "I was cleaning out the last of Dad's storage unit," Colby said. "This was in a locked drawer. Took me a few weeks to work up the nerve to open it." I reached for the letter. The paper was heavy, aged, but the ink was clear. I didn't open it yet. I looked at the ring first. It was the sapphire one, deep blue, almost black in the light. Simple band, worn edges, a quiet kind of beauty. "I think he meant it for you," Colby said. I nodded. I opened the letter. "Helena, if you're holding this, then I didn't say enough while I could. I've never been good at speaking from the heart when it's still beating, but I hope you'll hear me now. This ring isn't the one I gave you when we married. That one was tradition. This one is intention. I had it made after our 40th anniversary. A way of marking the years not by ceremony, but by endurance. You stayed when I shut down. You softened when I turned rigid. You gave me grace when I didn't know how to ask for it. And you raised our son even when I forgot how to be a father first. I wanted to give this to you in person. I wanted to take you to Mendocino, to the cottage, to stand with you at the edge of the sea and thank you. But time slipped. My body slowed. My heart, well, you already know. So here it is, a circle. Not perfect, but whole, like us. I'm sorry for the years I let my silence speak louder than my love. I hope this ring tells you what I didn't always say. You were never just my wife. You were my center, yours, N. I folded the letter slowly, holding it in both hands. Colby didn't speak. He just sat with me while I let the weight of it settle. "Thank you for bringing it," I said. He nodded. "I've been thinking," he said after a while, "about what comes next, not just for me, but for everything Dad left behind, for what you're building." I looked at him, waiting. "I don't want to be a part of it unless I earn my place," he said. "But if one day you think I've changed enough, I'd like to help with the foundation, with what you're creating." I said nothing, just looked at him. He didn't flinch. "I'll keep working," he said, "whether you say yes or not." I slid the letter into the box, then reached for the ring. It felt cool in my palm, familiar, even though I'd never worn it before. I slipped it onto my finger. It fit perfectly. Colby stood after that, sensing the conversation had reached its edge. He moved toward the door, paused, and turned. "Thank you," he said, "for letting me sit here today." After he left, I stayed at the table for a long time, my fingers tracing the edge of the ring. It didn't shine like a diamond, it didn't catch the light, but it felt like truth. That evening, I lit a fire and read the letter again, not to feel sad, but to feel known. I didn't cry, not this time. I just sat with the memory of a man who loved me better in silence than most ever do in words. And in that stillness, I understood something. Healing isn't about forgetting what hurt. It's about holding what mattered, even after it's gone. The garage hadn't changed much since the first night I opened its rusted door and found my past preserved in chrome and oil. But it felt different now. The air wasn't as heavy. The silence wasn't as sharp. Something had softened. I stood in front of the Jaguar first. Nathaniel had spent months restoring it. Every bolt, every stitch of leather, every polished surface bore his patience. But I didn't need it to remember him. He had already written himself into other things, letters, deeds, quiet gestures I was still uncovering. I moved to the Porsche, sleek, elegant. It reminded me of the woman I used to be when the world still felt wide and thrilling. But I wasn't chasing that version of myself anymore. I was becoming someone new. And then there was the Duesenberg SSJ. It sat like a monarch among princes, long, bold lines, a sense of history so thick it almost hummed when I passed my hand along its fender. Nathaniel had once said only 2 had ever been made, and that if you owned one, you weren't just a collector, you were a guardian. I ran my fingers along the hood and whispered, "I'll keep you." Ray arrived that afternoon, his truck backing gently into the gravel outside the garage. He stepped out with his clipboard, a pair of gloves, and that same unreadable look he always wore when something sentimental was about to become practical. "You sure?" he asked as I opened the garage door. "I am." We started with the Jaguar. He walked around it slowly, checking seals, jotting down mileage, nodding as he inspected the interior. "This one'll fetch a fine number," he said. "And the Porsche? Collectors will line up. She's a beauty. But the Duesenberg, that's the soul." I nodded. "That one stays with me." We spent the next 2 hours taking photos, reviewing old records, and preparing listing drafts. Ray handled everything with the respect of someone who understood that these weren't just vehicles. They were chapters. When we finished, I brought out 2 glasses of lemonade and handed him an envelope. "What's this?" he asked. "A retainer," I said. "For continued maintenance. I may not drive it often, but I want her to run like she did the day Nathaniel finished her." He raised his eyebrows but said nothing, just folded the envelope and slipped it into his back pocket. "You're building something," he said as he took a sip, "and you're doing it right." That evening, I returned to the cottage and opened my notebook. At the top of a new page, I wrote, "The Mary's Foundation." Below that, I listed the mission: support financial literacy and estate security for older women. It sounded formal, but to me, it was personal. Too many women I knew had handed their futures to others, trusting that love would protect them. I had been one of them, until the rusted key, until the letter, until the silence became a mirror. The next day, I met with a nonprofit consultant Miranda had recommended, a retired accountant named Evelyn who wore large glasses and spoke with a kindness that didn't dull her precision. "We can set up a charitable trust," she said, flipping through my notes. "Use the proceeds from the car sales to establish your starting capital. Keep your name off the public board if you'd like, but the story, that should be told." "I don't need recognition," I said. "Just reach," she nodded. "Then we build it that way." By the end of the week, the Jaguar and Porsche were sold, the wire transfers confirmed, the foundation account created, and just like that, 2 pieces of metal became something more, a legacy forged not from what was lost, but from what was reclaimed. Colby called the next morning. "I saw the listing," he said, "the cars. I thought you might keep them all." I kept what mattered. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "The foundation. That's real?" "It is. And you're using my name." "It's your father's name," I said gently, "and mine." There was a pause. "Can I contribute?" "Not yet," I said, "but maybe someday." I heard something shift in his breathing, a kind of acceptance, a kind of beginning. That night, I stood in the garage beside the Duesenberg and ran my hand over the hood again. I imagined women across the country, sitting at kitchen tables, learning how to sign their own names on things that mattered. I imagined quiet revolutions sparked by knowledge, not noise. Nathaniel had taught me that love was preparation. Now I was teaching it forward. Spring arrived in Mendocino, not with a sudden burst, but with a quiet unfolding. The kind you might miss if you weren't paying attention. Buds on the saffria, rosemary bush, light filtering softer through the windows, birds returning to the cliffs with songs that sounded more confident than before. I woke each morning without an alarm. The cottage had settled into its rhythm, and so had I. On a Monday, I walked into the town library with a manila folder and a trembling purpose. The woman at the front desk looked up. Can I help you? I'd like to offer a workshop, I said. Basic financial literacy, specifically for women, retirement planning, inheritance, protecting assets. She blinked, then smiled. We've never had one of those. Then maybe it's time. We booked a room for Thursday afternoons. Nothing formal, no flyers, just a note on the bulletin board and a short line in the community newsletter. The first session, 2 women showed up. A widow with a fixed income and a school teacher recently retired. We sat around a small table with chipped edges, and I started with a story. Mine, but trimmed of names. How many of you have ever signed something you didn't fully read? I asked. They both raised their hands. By the 3rd week, there were 5 of us. Then 8. Lorraine started bringing cookies. One woman brought a friend who brought her sister. Before long, we outgrew the meeting room and moved to the larger space near the back, just across from the biographies. We called it the Second Signature Project, because that's where most women lose their power. On the second signature. The one that seems like a formality, but quietly hands everything away. I kept the sessions practical. How to read a trust. What questions to ask an attorney. How to spot coercion when it's disguised as care. I shared the mistakes I made. The silence I mistook for love, the cost of waiting too long to ask, what does this mean? Some women cried. Others brought folders of documents they didn't understand. We sat together and read them line by line. It wasn't charity, it was reclamation. On Fridays, I drove the Duesenberg along Highway 1. The engine purred like memory, and the wind pulled gently at my sleeves. I didn't speed. I didn't need to. The road wasn't something to conquer, it was something to inhabit. The curves became familiar, the cliffs companions. I'd stop sometimes at a lookout, park, and sit with my thermos of tea and a notepad, writing, not for the world, but for myself, letters I never sent, lists I never needed to finish, moments I wanted to remember just as they were. One afternoon, Lorraine joined me. We sat in silence for a while, watching the fog roll in like a blanket tucking in the sea. "You've changed," she said eventually. I had to. "No, I mean, you chose to." I thought about that. "Yes," I said. "I did." She nodded, then pulled something from her bag, a brochure, folded and worn. "I want to do what you're doing," she said. "Start a group in my hometown, not the same format, just something." "You should." "I don't know where to begin." I smiled. "You already did." We stayed until the sun dipped low, then drove back to the cottage. She stayed for dinner, soup and bread and laughter that felt earned. That night, as I washed the dishes, I caught a glimpse of myself in the window. Older, softer, but not smaller. There was strength in these lines, a roadmap of survival. A testament to what it means to rebuild without asking permission. The next morning, I woke before sunrise, dressed in soft clothes and wrapped a shawl around my shoulders. I stepped outside and watched the sky shift from indigo to gold. The birds were already singing. The tide was in, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't holding my breath. I was living. It was nearly summer when he returned. The lavender bush I planted in March had begun to bloom. The air carried that sweet, grounded scent of salt and soil. I was in the garden, knees in the dirt, wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat Lorraine insisted made me look like someone in a painting. I didn't hear footsteps, just the sound of a paper tray settling onto the porch table. "I brought coffee," Colby said. I turned slowly. He was standing there holding 2 cups. No hesitation in his voice, no apology in his posture. He wasn't dressed up. A soft green t-shirt, canvas work pants, mud still clinging to the knees. His face was sunburned. There was a scratch along his forearm and a smudge of something on his collarbone that looked like paint or plaster. "I hope you still take it black," he added. I rose slowly and dusted off my gloves. "I do." He handed me the cup and sat on the porch steps like he'd been there 100 times. I sat beside him. We didn't speak for a while. The birds were louder than we were, and I didn't mind. Finally, he looked out over the hedges and said, "We just finished installing the first window frame. It's not even real glass yet, just a placeholder, but the woman who's moving in cried when she saw the view." I sipped the coffee. "Where is it?" "North Oakland, co-op housing, all sliding scale, funded mostly by local grants." "Are you building it?" "Helping, mostly organizing materials, logistics, sweat labor." "And you like it?" He nodded. "It's honest. You can't fake pouring concrete." There was no pride in his tone, just presence. He set his cup down and walked to the garden bed. Without asking, he pulled on gloves from the railing and began clearing weeds from the far row. I watched him. His movements were careful, methodical. He didn't ask which plants were which. He remembered. The sun shifted. I stood and joined him, trimming the rosemary while he worked beside me in silence. After a while, he said, "I didn't think I'd like the work at first. I thought it would feel like punishment. And now? Now it feels like a second language I should have learned a long time ago." I nodded. We worked like that for another hour, shoulder to shoulder, not as judge and defendant, not as mother and child who'd forgotten how to be near each other, just two people tending something that needed care. When we finished, I poured us each a glass of water and we sat under the cypress tree. He leaned back against the trunk and closed his eyes. "I've been thinking about the foundation," he said after a while. I said nothing. "I've been helping one of the women at the pantry. She's 63. Used to manage a restaurant until COVID shut it down. She had nothing saved. Signed papers she didn't understand. Lost the condo she lived in for 30 years. He looked at me. "She reminds me of you, not because of what she lost, because she never stopped showing up." I waited. I think about how close I came to stealing what wasn't mine, and then I think about what you built instead, and I wonder. He paused. "I wonder if one day you'd let me continue it, the foundation, when you're ready to hand it over." He didn't say it with entitlement. He said it with hope. I looked at him, really looked. His face had changed, softer, but not unsure. The kind of softness that comes from surviving yourself. "I don't know yet," I said, careful. He nodded like he'd expected that. "But I'm glad you asked." He smiled, a small, tired, real smile. I stood and reached for our empty glasses. He followed me to the porch. "I'm not done learning," he said quietly. "None of us are," I replied. He walked down the path with slow steps. Just before he reached the gate, he turned. "Next week," he said, "we're framing the last unit. You don't have to come. But if you wanted to, I could save you a seat." I didn't answer. He smiled anyway, then walked away. Inside, I set the glasses in the sink and looked out at the garden we'd just tended. The rows weren't perfect, some lines crooked, a few leaves bruised, but everything was growing. And maybe, just maybe, so were we. The engine rumbled beneath me like a memory awakened. I hadn't driven a car in over a decade, not since Nathaniel insisted chauffeurs were a more refined statement of lifestyle. But this wasn't a statement. It was a farewell. The Duesenberg convertible had sat untouched at the back of the Mendocino garage, hidden under two tarps and a thick coat of dust. Its blue lacquer now gleamed in the spring sun, lovingly restored by the same hands that once cradled my heartbreak. Ray and I had spent a quiet month tuning it back to life. Carburetor, belts, fluids, tires. It was the kind of work that didn't require words, just trust. I slid on a silk scarf, tucked the letter into the glove box, and fastened the ring on my right hand. Not the wedding band. I had placed that in a cedar box months ago. This was the sapphire ring Nathaniel gave me on our 20th anniversary. Deep blue, like the ocean today. The road unfurled in front of me like a ribbon. Waves crashed to my left. Fields of wild poppies danced on the hills to my right. The sea was wide open, like my future. He used to say, "Love is preparation, not flowers or dinners, not gestures, but groundwork, systems, safety nets." I didn't understand it then, but I do now. The wind tangled through my silver hair. I let it. No pins, no spray, just softness, just air. Behind me, the cottage with the olive tree, the garden Colby had helped weed yesterday. He'd shown up without calling, brought me black coffee and asked about foundation bylaws like he was asking about family recipes. There was a gentleness in his tone. Like maybe he finally understood that I was not the obstacle. I was the source. We don't raise children to repay us. We raise them so they can choose who to become. And sometimes they come back, not to fix what's broken, but to begin again. Colby had asked softly, almost sheepishly, "Do you think I could help carry the foundation someday?" I had only smiled. No answer. Not yet. Because healing wasn't permission. It was peace. The tires hummed against the coastal road as I passed mile marker 47, the same number that had once been etched on the back of a photograph I found in the garage. Nathaniel, in his Navy uniform, wind at his back, grin wide and honest. A seagull cried above me, then dipped low toward the waves. We think closure is a door, but it's not. It's a view, a breath, a day where the past no longer needs your attention. I slowed as I reached a bluff, stepped out barefoot, the ground still wet with dew. From the glove box, I took the folded letter, Nathaniel's final note. He had written, "I left you the garage, Helena, not because I thought it was all you were worth. I left it because it was the only place untouched by the war of our wealth. I left it because I knew, if anything could save our legacy, it would be you." I folded the paper with both hands, pressed it to my lips, and tucked it back beside the map. I turned toward the horizon. It was no longer a question, no longer a fear. It was just mine. Back in the car, I let the Duesenberg purr to life. The engine no longer sounded like the past. It sounded like possibility. They called it a garage, but it was a gate. They thought I was broken, but I was building. They thought silence meant surrender, but silence is how justice breathes. The sun was climbing now. Birds moved in loops above the cliffs. A new day was coming, and I was no longer afraid to meet it alone. I eased the car forward. The wind lifted the scarf at my neck, and I laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because I could. Because I had survived. Justice can be quiet, and quiet can be the loudest victory. As the Duesenberg rolled toward the edge of the coastal road, the camera held wide. The sea, the car, a woman reborn, small against the vastness yet whole, fade to white, fade to silence.